The desert had a way of swallowing sound. When the armored convoy rolled across the dry valley floor, the rumbling engines and rattling tracks seemed to echo against nothing, only to vanish into the weight of the storm building ahead. By dusk, the sandstorm was on them, orange skies, wind like a whip, dust clogging filters, and scratching lungs. Visibility dropped to less than 10 meters. Inside her APC, Sergeant Dana Reeves checked her comms panel for the 10th time in as many minutes. Static hissed in her headset. Somewhere up front, command vehicles were trying to keep formation, but she knew in her gut they were blind. Her partner, Specialist Riley Torres, crouched beside the driver's seat, fingers drumming restlessly on her rifle. She had a look that Dana had learned to trust, sharp, calculating, but always restless before something bad. The storm was cover, but for whom? The ambush came without warning. Through the choking haze, shapes emerged, RPG trails slicing the air, impact thunder that ripped through metal. The first blast caught the lead APC, flipping it sideways like a tin toy. The convoy scattered. Dana's own vehicle shuddered violently, alarm screaming as the driver swerved hard left. Then the world flipped end over end. Dana tasted blood before she felt pain. The APC lay on its side, sparks spitting from a torn battery. Wounded men groaned, trapped beneath metal benches. Smoke, oil, and dust mingled until breathing felt like drowning. Riley was already moving. She had pulled a half-conscious corporal free of the wreckage when Dana regained her senses. Another blast landed close, sand hammering down like rain, shrapnel tearing the air. The squad leader was down. The platoon was leaderless, and enemy fighters were pressing closer through the storm. Dana. Riley's voice cut through the chaos. We can't hold them here. We've got to move the wounded now. Dana's throat burned, but she forced herself up. Outside, the desert was chaos. Overturned APCs, flames flickering weak against the storm, gunfire stuttering through the haze. She saw silhouettes, enemy fighters in desert robes advancing fast. Most of their platoon lay wounded, pinned, or too dazed to move. Retreat wasn't an option. Calling for evac was impossible. The sandstorm swallowed radio signals whole. It was just them, 2 women against an entire ambush. And somehow, they had to save everyone still alive. The first body Dana dragged free was heavier than she expected. A private with a broken leg, screaming every time the wind shoved sand into his wounds. Riley provided cover fire, bursts of her rifle lighting the storm for a fraction of a second, enough to scatter the first wave of attackers. Dana's muscles screamed as she pulled the wounded man into a shallow depression behind a half-buried dune. Another explosion rocked the ground. Another APC toppled, half its crew spilling out broken. This wasn't survival anymore. This was rescue or death. 2 of us, Riley panted, firing short, controlled bursts. 20 of them, maybe more. Then we make every shot count, Dana said, reloading with shaking hands. The storm howled, erasing horizon and sky, but it couldn't erase their resolve. Against the fury of sand and steel, 2 soldiers stood where no one should have stood, hauling the wounded, fighting back, refusing to let the desert swallow their platoon. The battle had just begun. If the storm was their enemy, the desert was their ally. Dana realized it when she dragged the 3rd wounded soldier into the shallow trench. The wind, as brutal as it was, kept visibility low. The attackers couldn't coordinate well either. Their gunfire came scattered, hesitant. Somewhere in the dust, they were blind, just like the platoon had been. But blind or not, they had numbers. Riley dropped into the trench beside Dana, shoving a magazine into her rifle. Her hands were raw, knuckles cut open from dragging bodies. We can't just sit here. They'll find us if they keep probing. Dana wiped blood from her brow, leaving a streak of red mixed with dirt. Around them, 5 wounded men lay groaning, 3 more too far gone to speak. Some clutched rifles, but were too weak to lift them. She looked toward the overturned APC, half buried in the sand. Smoke curled upward, but was torn away by the storm. Inside, more men were trapped. She could hear one pounding faintly, screaming muffled through twisted steel. She didn't hesitate. "Cover me." Riley cursed but nodded. She popped up, firing in short bursts toward the storm shadows. The answering gunfire cracked back instantly, sand kicking up around her helmet. Dana sprinted low, wind tearing at her uniform, until she slammed against the APC hull. She clawed at the twisted hatch with bloody hands. It wouldn't budge. She switched to her knife, prying at the bent metal until it peeled just enough to get fingers inside. Inside, a private's terrified eyes stared back. "Hold on," Dana shouted against the storm. She braced her boots and pulled until her shoulders burned. The hatch gave with a scream of metal. One by one, she pulled men out, pushing them toward the trench as Riley laid down suppressive fire. Every step was a battle. Every rescue was a gamble. At one point, an enemy fighter appeared through the storm, no more than 10 feet away. He raised his rifle, too close for Dana to counter. Riley's shot cracked through the storm, dropping him before he could fire. The storm swallowed the sound just as quickly. By the time Dana stumbled back into the trench, dragging the last survivor over her shoulder, her vision swam. Her arms trembled with exhaustion. But when she collapsed beside Riley, the trench wasn't full of the dead. It was full of the living. Wounded, broken, but alive. Riley pressed a hand to Dana's shoulder. That's half the platoon. We've got him out." Dana looked at the men, their eyes flickering with desperate gratitude even as blood stained the sand around them. Half the platoon. That was a miracle already. But the storm wasn't letting up. Neither were the attackers. Shadows still moved in the swirling dust. Rifle fire cracked every few minutes. "Half the platoon isn't enough," Dana rasped, forcing herself upright. "We're bringing back all of them." Her voice carried no doubt, no hesitation. Riley nodded, jaw set. "Then let's finish this." As the storm howled and the desert swallowed the horizon, the two women prepared for the impossible. To drag every last survivor out of hell, with nothing but grit, fire, and each other. The rescue was far from over. The trench reeked of smoke, blood, and desperation. The storm screamed overhead, rattling grains of sand against their helmets like hail. Dana leaned against the dirt wall, trying to slow her breath, but every inhale tasted like grit and iron. Riley crouched at the edge, peering through her scope. "They're regrouping," she said. Her voice was hoarse from shouting over the storm, but steady. "Not charging yet, just watching." Dana knew what that meant. The ambushers hadn't expected resistance. They were recalculating. She turned to look at the survivors, 9 men sprawled in the trench, bandages soaked through, eyes glazed with shock. One private clutched at a rosary, lips moving soundlessly. Another muttered his daughter's name over and over. The medic was among the wounded, his arm mangled and unusable. That left Dana. She ripped strips from her undershirt, working quickly to bind wounds, stop bleeding, anything to keep them from slipping away. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady. "Stay with me," she whispered to each soldier. "You'll see the sun again." Riley pulled back from the edge, her face streaked with grime. Ammo's low. 2 mags left. Dana didn't even pause. "Make him count." A low boom rolled through the storm. Mortar fire. Sand geyser behind them, showering the trench. A second boom followed, closer. The attackers were zeroing in. Panic rippled through the wounded. One man tried to scramble up, but Dana shoved him down. "Stay low. They want us to break. We don't break." Her voice carried steel, and for a moment the men stilled. Riley grabbed Dana's arm. "We can't sit here. The trench is a death trap. We need higher ground, something defensible." Dana scanned the haze. Through gaps in the swirling sand, she caught glimpses, jagged rock outcrops jetting from the desert floor, maybe 100 meters away. High enough to see, high enough to hold. But how do you move 9 wounded men through a storm, under fire, with 2 women carrying rifles? Dana's chest tightened. The impossible again. We do it in shifts, she said finally. You cover. I drag too. Back and forth until they're all up. Riley stared at her, then shook her head. No, you won't make it halfway before you collapse. We carry them together. Faster. Together. Together, Riley repeated. Her eyes locked on Dana's. No hesitation. No doubt. Dana felt something hot in her chest. Not fear, not yet, but the weight of what Riley was offering. Trust, absolute and unshakable, in the middle of hell. All right, Dana said. Together. The first carry nearly broke her. A corporal with a shredded leg, heavy as stone. Dana grabbed under his arms, Riley at his ankles, and they heaved him out of the trench. The storm pounded their backs, bullets snapping past. Riley fired blindly once, forcing shadows to scatter, before they staggered forward again. Every step was agony. Sand dragged at their boots. Wind pushed them sideways. The man screamed every time his leg bounced. But they made it to the rocks. Dana dropped behind cover, gasping for air, before sprinting back into the storm. Again, and again. The second soldier. The third. By the fourth, Dana's vision blurred, black edging into her sight. Riley shoved her shoulder. Breathe. You drop, I carry you too. Dana grit her teeth and kept moving. 6 trips. 7. 8. Each time they returned to the trench, fewer shadows loomed. Riley's cover fire was thinning their ranks, buying precious minutes. By the 9th soldier, Dana's body was beyond exhaustion. She and Riley staggered, barely lifting their boots, the wounded man's weight dragging them to their knees. A figure emerged from the haze, enemy rifle leveled at them. Dana couldn't raise her weapon in time. Riley couldn't either. But the man they carried, half-conscious, bleeding from his side, pulled his sidearm and fired 3 rounds. The fighter dropped into the sand. The soldier slumped back, blood bubbling at his lips. Told you, not done yet, he rasped. They laid him behind the rocks with the others, but Dana saw his eyes glaze over before she could bind his wounds. She didn't cry. Not yet. She only clenched her jaw and picked up her rifle. Half the platoon was alive. That was still something. That was still worth fighting for. And the storm wasn't over. The rock outcrop rose like an island in a sea of sand. From its crest, visibility stretched just far enough to spot shifting shadows of the ambushers circling. They hadn't given up. They were testing, waiting, hunting. Dana crouched beside Riley, both women dirty, bloodied, and running on fumes. Below them, 9 wounded men lay hidden in shallow depressions between the rocks. Their lives rested on the rifles of 2 exhausted soldiers. The wind screamed around them, tugging at their helmets, drowning every other sound. Riley spat grit. They'll come again. Soon. Dana nodded. Her body wanted to collapse, but her mind burned sharp. She checked her rifle, 1 mag half full. A pistol at her hip. 2 grenades left between them. That was it. The storm eased just enough to reveal their enemy. A dozen figures spread out, rifles raised. Moving slow, careful, advancing through the sand. Dana steadied her rifle, exhaling long. Wait until they're close. Riley grinned grimly. Close enough to see their teeth? Closer. The first wave crept to within 20 meters. Shadows with knives of steel in their eyes. Dana squeezed the trigger. 1 went down, then another. Riley's shots followed, crisp and precise. Gunfire lit the storm like lightning. Sand exploded around them. Rocks chipped and cracked. Dana ducked low, heart pounding, then rose to fire again. A bullet grazed her arm, hot pain slicing through. She ignored it. The wounded below cried out, but none moved. They knew silence meant survival. A shadow broke from the left flank, charging uphill. Riley met him head-on, a burst dropping him flat. Another came from the right. Dana hurled her last grenade, the explosion muffled by sand but enough to scatter 3 fighters. For every one they dropped, 2 more pressed closer. The world narrowed into rhythm. Fire, duck, reload, breathe. Pain, dust, fire, repeat. Time blurred. At some point, Dana realized Riley wasn't firing. She turned, panic surging, only to see Riley slump against the rocks, blood spreading from her shoulder. Riley. Dana dropped beside her, ripping a bandage from her pack, pressing it hard. Riley's face twisted in pain, but her eyes stayed fierce. "Don't stop," she gasped. "They'll break through. Keep shooting." Dana's throat burned, but she obeyed. She rose again, rifle kicking against her shoulder until the mag ran dry. Then her pistol. Then nothing but silence. The storm roared. And then, faintly, another sound, a deep rumble. Engines. Through the dust, shapes appeared. Armored reinforcements, headlights cutting through the storm. The enemy froze. Some fled into the haze. Others fired wildly before vanishing into the desert. Dana collapsed beside Riley, tears mixing with sand. Relief broke over her in waves. They had held. 2 soldiers alone, against the storm, against the odds, against death itself. Below, the survivors stirred, voices hoarse but alive. A miracle in the desert. Riley gripped Dana's arm, weak but steady. "Told you we'd finish it together." Dana smiled through blood and grit. "Yeah, together." The storm raged on, but inside the circle of rocks, hope burned bright. The rumble of engines was like thunder after drought, impossible, almost divine. For long minutes Dana thought she was hallucinating, that exhaustion had finally cracked her mind. But then the headlights cut through the sandstorm, white beams piercing the haze, and she knew. Reinforcements. "Hold on, Riley," she whispered, crouched over her partner's bleeding shoulder. "They're here." Riley's lips curled into a faint, pained smile. "Told you, we just had to hold long enough." Dana pressed her hands harder into the bandage, but her own arms shook violently from fatigue. Blood seeped stubbornly through her fingers. She needed medics, real medics, not battlefield improvisation. The armored vehicles pulled to a halt at the base of the rocks. Figures spilled out, rifles at the ready. Dana raised one arm weakly and shouted, "Friendly. Survivors here." Her voice cracked but carried through the storm. The soldiers swarmed up, eyes widening at the sight. 2 women, battered and covered in blood, guarding 9 wounded men with nothing but empty rifles and sheer will. A sergeant dropped to Dana's side. "Holy hell, you held them off." "Not me," Dana said hoarsely. She looked down at Riley. "We did." Within moments, medics moved in, laying Riley on a stretcher. She groaned but stayed conscious, refusing to let go of Dana's sleeve until the last second. Dana squeezed her hand. "I'll be right behind you." The surviving men were carried out one by one, some unconscious, others whispering broken thanks as they were lifted toward safety. Dana felt the weight lift from her chest each time, like boulders rolling away. But for each life saved, she remembered the ones left behind, the men who had fallen in the ambush, whose bodies still lay scattered in the sand. When the last survivor was loaded, Dana's knees finally buckled. She dropped onto the rocks, chest heaving. A medic tried to help her, but she waved him off. "Check the others first. I can wait." She sat there, staring into the storm. The silence after gunfire was almost worse. Her ears rang. Her body screamed with bruises and cuts, but her mind refused to settle. She replayed every shot, every step dragging bodies through the sand, every scream of pain. Had it been enough? The sergeant crouched beside her. "You saved 9 men. Against those odds. That's not just enough. That's a miracle." Dana didn't answer right away. Her eyes tracked the faint outlines of the dead being left behind in the haze. War didn't give time to bury them. It gave only minutes to mourn before the next fight. She finally stood, legs trembling but unbroken. "Get us moving," she said, "before the storm clears and they regroup." The convoy rumbled to life again, crawling back through the desert. Dana sat in the back of one APC, between stretchers. Riley lay to her right, pale but alive. Across from her, one soldier with a bandaged chest reached out a hand. Dana took it, squeezing firmly. For the first time since the ambush began, she allowed herself to breathe. But she knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The base hospital reeked of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Rows of cots lined the dim ward, each occupied by wounded from battles across the desert. Dana sat on the edge of one, her uniform stiff with dried blood and sand, her head pounding from exhaustion. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, but her eyes never left Riley's cot. Riley lay pale beneath thin sheets, her shoulder wrapped in thick bandages. Machines beeped softly, marking her pulse and oxygen. A medic had told Dana the wound had missed the artery by inches. Inches. That was the only reason Riley was alive. Dana's hands clenched into fists. Inches decided life or death. Inches decided whether 9 men went home or whether their families received folded flags. The fragility of it all gnawed at her. "Lieutenant." She turned. It was the sergeant from the rescue, cap tucked under his arm. "Wanted you to know. Command's already heard. They're saying you and your partner saved the platoon. They're calling it a stand for the history books." Dana's throat tightened. "History books don't smell the blood," she said flatly. The sergeant hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe not, but families will know their boys came home because of you too." He left her with that, and Dana sat in silence, staring at Riley. Hours passed. Medics came and went. Soldiers shuffled in with fresh wounds, shuffled out stitched and silent. Dana didn't move. When Riley finally stirred, blinking groggily, Dana leaned close. "You made it," Dana whispered. Relief hit her, so hard her chest ached. Riley's lips twitched. "Course I did. Told you we finish it together." Dana laughed, though it sounded more like a sob. "You nearly proved yourself a liar." Riley's gaze softened. "We saved them, Dana. That's what matters." For the first time, Dana let herself remember each face. The terrified private with the rosary, the corporal with the shredded leg, the man who fired his sidearm in their arms just before dying. She remembered their voices, their fear, their courage. The cost was carved into her bones, but so was the worth. A nurse approached, pressing a paper into Dana's hand. Orders. Deployment rotation. Dana was being reassigned after recovery. Another front, another storm. She folded the paper without reading it. She already knew. This wasn't the last time she'd be called to do the impossible. That night, when she finally lay down on a cot, sleep came heavy, dragging her deep. But her dreams weren't of blood or sand. They were of 9 men boarding a convoy alive. They were of Riley's hand gripping hers, even when pain tore through her body. They were of survival, against the storm, against the odds. And in that, Dana found strength enough for what was still to come. The desert night was cold, sharp against Dana's skin as she walked out beyond the floodlights of the base. Behind her, the compound buzzed with life. Generators hummed, trucks rumbled, and voices carried in a low chorus. But out here, beyond the last cone of light, there was silence. She needed silence. Her boots crunched in the sand as she approached a row of simple wooden markers. Each one bore a name scrawled in black ink, the temporary graves of those who had not returned. The platoon's losses had been buried that morning, while Dana had been forced to sit in the hospital by Riley's side. Now, standing before the row, her throat closed. She traced one marker with her fingertips, the wood rough beneath her skin. The name was Sergeant Quan, the man who had covered their retreat until a bullet dropped him. Dana could still see him falling, still hear his final order. "Get them out, Lieutenant." Her chest tightened. She had gotten them out, but not all of them. The wind picked up, carrying whispers of sand across the markers. Dana closed her eyes and whispered back, "I'm sorry." Footsteps crunched behind her. She turned to see Riley, bundled in a sling and blanket, moving slowly but stubbornly toward her. Dana rushed forward. "You shouldn't be out of bed." Riley smirked, pale but defiant. "And leave you to drown in your own head? Not a chance." They stood together before the graves. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, not uncomfortable, but filled with all the words they didn't know how to say. Finally, Riley broke it. You did what you had to. We saved who we could. Dana's jaw clenched. And lost too many. That's war. Riley's voice was steady, though her eyes shone. It doesn't make sense, and it doesn't play fair. But if you hadn't fought, if you hadn't dragged those men, we'd have lost everyone. Dana swallowed hard. She knew Riley was right, but guilt was a stubborn enemy. It clung tighter than any ambush. The sound of approaching boots interrupted them. The sergeant from before appeared, saluting sharply. Lieutenant, Corporal, Command wants you both in the operations tent. Debrief. Dana nodded. On our way. As they walked back, Riley whispered, You know what this means? They're going to put us right back in. Dana managed a grim smile. Of course they are. We proved we can do the impossible. That makes us dangerous. The ops tent was crowded with officers, maps, and radio chatter. The atmosphere was thick, urgent. As Dana and Riley entered, the commanding officer looked up. At ease, he said, though his gaze was sharp. We've reviewed your actions. Extraordinary. You held against overwhelming odds, evacuated 9 men, and bought the convoy enough time to regroup. For that, the platoon lives. The brass is already drafting commendations. Dana stiffened. Sir, with respect, commendations won't bring back the men we lost. A pause followed. Then the commander's voice softened. No, Lieutenant, but they'll remind everyone else that sacrifice wasn't for nothing. Riley shifted beside her, whispering, Take it. For them. Dana nodded slowly. She understood. Recognition wasn't for her ego. It was a marker, like the wooden graves. Proof that lives had meant something. But even as she accepted it, she knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Because war had a way of circling back. The morning sun rose harsh and unforgiving over the base. Dana sat with Riley on a bench outside the infirmary, the uniforms freshly laundered but still smelling faintly of smoke. Around them, life continued. Trucks loaded, helicopters chopped the air, and soldiers prepared for the next mission. But for one fragile hour, there was peace. Riley leaned back, her injured arm in its sling, eyes closed against the light. Feels almost normal, doesn't it? Dana scanned the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, golden and cruel. Almost. They sat in silence, listening to the hum of life around them. Dana let herself imagine, just for a moment, that the world outside was quiet. No gunfire, no ambushes, no bleeding men in the sand. Just the sound of boots on gravel and the occasional burst of laughter. But the illusion broke when the commander approached, papers in hand. He stopped before them. You'll both be redeployed within 72 hours. Another unit needs experienced officers. Riley groaned. Barely stitched up, and they're throwing me back. War doesn't wait for healing, the commander said simply. He turned to Dana. You understand. Dana did. Too well. When he left, Riley sighed. You think we'll make out of the next one? Dana looked at her, studying the pale face, the stubborn eyes. I think we'll keep each other alive. Like always. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the desert. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't the silence of guilt or mourning. It was the silence of survival, of 2 soldiers who had done the impossible and would be asked to do it again. Dana finally whispered, 9 men walked because of us. That's worth whatever comes next. Riley's lips curved into a tired smile. Then we'll keep walking too. As the desert wind swept over them, carrying the echoes of battles past and the promise of battles yet to come, they held onto that thought. 2 soldiers, alone, but never truly alone. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, the war waited for them.